Hello and welcome to Remote and Connected with Westbrook Community Church. My name's Austin, and for the second video in the Remote and Connected series, we're going to be talking about Sabbath Rest, Covid19, and Palm Sunday. So let's dig in. This week, I want to talk about something that I've been praying and thinking about for quite a while, basically since this whole Covid-19 situation really escalated here in Alberta. Many aspects of my life were derailed and forced online because of the quarantine restrictions that got put in place. And this made me feel a bit ambivalent, I think. Of course, I share the same concern that all of us feel about the future, how things are going to end up economically and financially. The same fear about health, the health of others around me. Lots of stuff, lots of really concerning stuff. But I also couldn't help but feel a bit refreshed. Let me explain that. It's not often that we're forced into a situation where our workloads become lighter, where we can only spend time with our immediate families, and where we have substantially less to do than we normally do. This is the first time in my life that I've been forced away from the many kinds of busyness that we all find ourselves entangled in this day and age. I understand as well as anyone that this change can leave us feeling isolated, extremely bored, anxious, confused, and that's all legit. That's all legitimate. We're not used to this kind of lull in life. And I think even more seriously, we're not used to rest. In many ways, I'm still trying to find ways to stay busy and stay distracted and stay consumed by something. But as I've been trying to get my bearings in this intense and troubling situation, I found my mind drifting towards the idea of Sabbath. As we're all dragged away, inevitably, from the busyness that consumes us, we are being forced into a kind of Sabbath rest, a ceasing, a break. And as I've realized this for myself, I've also wondered whether this crazy COVID-19 situation can be a chance to shoulder into a kind of Sabbath that I've never really had in my life. But this leads to the questions. What is the point of Sabbath? What does Sabbath mean for us now? What does it look like to do Sabbath well? Well, let's take a look at Sabbath and the context of Sabbath in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and see where that takes us. So first off, I think it's important to define what the word Sabbath even is, or explain it. And Sabbath, or Shabbat, is a Hebrew word that means to rest, to cease, to break, an intermission, that sort of thing. And the first time it's mentioned is in Genesis 2, 1-3, as something that the Creator God does after having made the cosmos in 6 days. We all know the story. God creates in 6 days and then rests on the seventh. But it's really important to highlight at this point that there's a lot more going on than an arbitrary amount of days required to create and then a day of rest after the fact. These numbers are really important and they mean something, and they factor into a huge part of what this story is about and what it means for us now. In the Hebrew mind and in the Hebrew scriptures, numbers are incredibly significant and symbolic. And 6 and 7 are perfect examples of this, maybe even the best. So the numbers 6 and 7 have special meanings, symbolic meanings, like I said. When we think about 6, usually we're going towards the idea of being incomplete, not full, imperfect, maybe even going into the area of maybe bad or chaos or something like that. Not quite that far, but definitely incomplete, not perfect, not what it should be. On the other hand, 7 is perfection, completion, totality, everything that something should be, fullness. Now, consider that these numbers are the numbers that show up to explain the creation narrative. That's really important. They're not just random. It wasn't just that it's just gonna take 6 days to create. No, the fact that there's 6 days of this creative process means that actually it's not fully complete yet. And what do we see on the seventh day? Well, we see that God rests. And so that when God rests, that's when creation is complete, is fulfilled, is everything that it should be. Does that make sense? The seventh day rest is actually the final step that God takes in the creative process that determines what life will be like in this new world. Now keep in mind, there is no slavery to toil, no slavery to other people, no strife, no struggle to survive, no tension or crisis that destabilizes life, that destabilizes our ability to live fully and live in abundance. Rather, this seventh day kind of world that God creates is perfect, is full, is complete, and is ultimately characterized by rest. And what this story suggests, is that humanity was created to live in a complete and a full way, a perfect way of rest in relationship with each other and God. But as we all know this, that the chapter after this, this beautiful picture comes crashing down. And toil and struggle and slavery and instability and chaos enter the realm of human existence and creation. And sadly, we don't really hear much about Sabbath rest until quite a bit later. And the first place that it really shows up again is in the commandments that God gives to Moses to give to the people of Israel while they're in the wilderness. And so let's explain that situation and scenario a little bit and get some context behind this new way that Sabbath shows up in the biblical story. So after Israel leaves Egypt and enters the wilderness, so to keep that in mind, when they're in the wilderness, God starts to give Israel a new picture of the kind of life that he wants them to have. This new and bright future that God promises Israel is best understood or totally covered by the concept of the promised land. The going back to that place that God had promised them, and there's this kind of idyllic life that God is going to bring them into through being obedient and living in the way that he's telling them to live. And what we see in this vision that God gives Israel for this promised land life is a throwback to many aspects of what life was like before the fall. And one of those very specific things, one of those important things, especially for what we're talking about now, is that there's this throwback to Sabbath and rest. Seventh day, complete, full rest life. So when Israel is being given this new picture of what their life will look like in the promised land, rest, Sabbath gets thrown back in and should be a paradigm of the life that they live once they're in the promised land. And as God starts to command them about what kind of rest they should be taking, what kind of Sabbath day life they should be living once they enter the promised land, we see kind of three general commands and ways of living that emerge. And the most extensive discussion on those are in Leviticus 23 and in Leviticus 25. So let's talk about those. First off, God commands that the Israelites take a seventh day in every week to rest and have a Sabbath rest on that day, every week. We all are kind of aware of that. That's actually kind of factored into our way of life here, where we have a weekend and usually we go to church on Sunday, our seventh day. But yeah, there's this seventh day interval where every 6 days, at the end of that sixth day, you don't do any work and you take this day of rest. Cool. But there's actually a lot more than that. So along with this cycle of 7-day kind of weekly intervals of rest, there's also a series of 7 festivals throughout the year. And some of them are kind of like a solemn, kind of holy and very kind of sad time. For example, the Day of Atonement, where the Jews would spend time and do rituals that would purify them as a nation from sin and impurity. But then there's also other festivals that are like a big party. Think of the Feast of Booths, or maybe the Passover, or whatever. There are these holy times of great joy, great solemnity, that are kind of orienting the community back to God and to Sabbath rest. But that's not it. There's actually a third interval or series of Sabbath rests that I haven't talked about yet. And that's actually year-long rests every 7th year. So it's like a Sabbath year where work doesn't happen, where the land is left to grow without any work or farming or whatever else, where people kind of just take it easy for the whole year. And actually, there's even one beyond this step, where every series of 7 years, there's this final big year called the Year of Jubilee, where basically everything kind of just gets released. If you had debt, it's released. If you had to sell your ancestral property to make a living, you get that back. Everything kind of just gets reset. And I'm not sure exactly how this would have worked, but it's kind of a fantastic idea if you think about it. So every 7th day, kind of every 7 times during the year, every 7th year, and then basically every 49 years. But what I want to emphasize about all of this is that God is asking them to start this way of Sabbath living while they are in the middle of a hostile desert, drifting around as a nomadic group of people. Now, if you know much about being a shepherd or a nomad, it's a difficult job, and keeping animals, a large amount of animals alive, is tough at the best of times, as I'm sure many of you know. But imagine then having thousands of people and animals and children and kids, and you're in the middle of a desert with almost no water, no vegetation, whatever else. It's an extreme situation, and I would be stressed out of my mind. And you see in the story of Numbers and in Exodus that people are definitely stressed out of their minds, and they make a lot of bad decisions because of that. But that's what we need to focus on, that they were commanded to take rest in a time where they needed to struggle to survive the most, the time when they were under the most pressure as a community. Not only was there, the threat of famine and people dying of thirst and all that sort of stuff, but there was enemies of different nations all over the place that were trying to kill them too. So imagine, God is telling them to take the day off every 7 days when they're barely just making ends meet. And of course, God provides a means for them to live in this time, with the manna from heaven and all that, and the water coming from a multitude of rocks and places miraculously throughout those stories. But there's this element where they're called to Sabbath in an extreme and difficult situation that requires them to have to trust God in order to rest and cease from their ability to make a living and to survive. So that's really, really challenging. But why, I guess, is the question that at least comes to my mind. Why rest when there's so much to do just to survive? What's the point? Well, there's many. And I think the most significant reasons are that God wants them to take time to actually experience and live in even a small amount of that original seventh-day Sabbath rest that they were created for. God wants to draw them into a temporary and limited form of Sabbath life, to taste it, to savor it. In other words, God wants them to experience Sabbath rest in the now, the present. I think another thing is that taking and giving rest on the Sabbath, on the seventh day, and during these 7 festivals and every 7 years and every 49th year or whatever, forces them to look forward to the fulfillment of that, at least in their minds, in the promised land. And the untold amount of seventh-day rest and completion and peace and order and ease that they are walking into on this journey. In other words, God wants them to look forward to the complete Sabbath rest of the future, or more complete at least. So let me just reiterate that. God wants them to experience Sabbath rest in the now, in their present, and God wants them to look forward to the completion or the fulfillment of that Sabbath rest in the future. But then this begs the question, what did they even do during this time? What does it mean to just rest? Well, during the seventh-day Sabbath, they would literally do nothing related to work, and they would kind of cease from everything. They would give everything a break. They would stop doing what they needed to survive. If they were really taking it seriously, they would stop all of the toil and the work required to maintain some livelihood for themselves and for their families. Basically just cold turkey stop for a day. And they would give their time and energy to enjoying life together and to connecting with God. And like I said, living in this limited form of life free from slavery, toil, crisis, survival, chaos. Even if it was still all around them, that they were called to kind of make this holy space, like this break time in the midst of all this stuff that they normally have to do just to survive. During the festivals, all of them would again have a weekly Sabbath day involved in them, but maybe it would be a week-long break, or but in general, they would have celebrations, they would have feasts, they would gather together to atone and to make sacrifices and all that sort of stuff. And during the year-long rests, they would even give the land rest, their animals rest, and they would restore people back to their land and their livelihoods if they were enslaved or if they had lost that land. So that's kind of what happened. But keep in mind that even when they were in Israel, when they were in this promised land, all of that required an insane amount of trust that God would provide for them and enable them to actually make this rest happen. Of course, in the back of their minds, just like any person, there would be this stress of, okay, well, yeah, I can take this break right now, but what about when I need to feed my kids and all that sort of stuff? So there's a very human element to this, in that it was a practical challenge, very, very challenging thing to take this kind of rest, especially back then. And I actually have an interesting story about Sabbath rest from when I was a kid. And this is the first time I was introduced to it. I'm not Jewish, but basically what happened is that me and my family were staying in Banff. Yeah, I know, ritzy. And we were staying in Banff. It was kind of the one time that happened. But and we were staying in the Banff Springs Hotel at the same time that there was an Orthodox Jew conference. And so they were all, they had the curls and the hats and the garb and everything, and they were all walking around, big beards, all that sort of stuff. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that in my life. Keep in mind, I'm maybe about 10 years old, 12 years old. And so basically, they came up to my dad, and they told him that they needed someone to help them with something. And what's important to note is that it was Saturday that day. And for us, we're used to having our kind of rest day, our break day on Sunday. But for the Jewish community, it's on Saturday. It starts kind of on Friday and then goes all the way through Saturday, 24-hour day. So anyways, they're in the middle of their Sabbath, and they have a dilemma. They basically needed somebody to do their toil for them because they didn't want to break Sabbath. But let me explain what that even looked like. So their concern was that they had left a Torah scroll, their big scroll form of an Old Testament, in their car. And because it was Sabbath, their tradition around Sabbath is that they don't light any fires or anything, including willfully or intentionally turning on a light. So if they turn on a light, for them that's kind of like breaking Sabbath. More than that, they can't like kind of toil by carrying something someplace. So they needed someone to basically open their car that had the automatic light on, and then take the scroll, which was quite heavy, and then take it to the place where they needed it for the next day. And the thing was, is they didn't actually want my dad to do it because being a Gentile, he's not, ritually clean and all that different stuff. But it's okay if a Gentile kid does it. In their minds, I was still clean. It was before manhood, and I wasn't responsible for sin or anything like that. So basically, they came up to my dad and said, "Can you get your son to open the car for us and take this scroll to the conference center?" And so that's what I did. And I remember there was about 3 or 4 times when I almost dropped this priceless scroll that I found out was from one of the biggest synagogues in New York. So it was a very interesting situation. And it was the first time I had experienced people that took Sabbath extremely seriously. And there's a lot that could be said about that, but I was very impressed. Now, a question that comes up now is, well, what about Sabbath now? What am I trying to say for us now, especially during this difficult COVID-19 situation that we find ourselves in? Well, first off, there's 3 things that I want to make as clear as I possibly can. First of all, I understand that many of us are facing serious financial and health issues related to this virus epidemic. And that will rightfully cause us a great amount of anxiety and uncertainty. And I don't want you to feel that I am undermining that or trying to say that it's not legitimate in this challenge to take rest. I understand that there are serious challenges and that we need to do what we can do to survive and to continue to get through this situation. So please don't misunderstand me with that. Secondly, I'm not suggesting that we should stop from looking for opportunities to work or find a way to provide for ourselves during this difficult time. I do not mean that as either. I totally understand where people are coming from with that concern, and I don't mean to say that you shouldn't do that. And thirdly, I don't want to undermine the hard work of all those people who are working tirelessly on the front lines right now to keep things in order and to keep people safe and enable people to heal. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to those who are working in hospitals and doing all the essential services that are continuing to happen. And I pray that you can find rest in this season too. And again, I just say thank you to all of you who are doing that sort of thing. Now, what I am suggesting about Sabbath is that we should, I'm just suggesting that we should use some of this free time that many of us have been forced into as Sabbath. Many of us, like I said, are forced into our homes with a lot less to do than normal. And what I'm realizing is that now is a better opportunity than probably any time to use some of that time, use some of that free time to take Sabbath rest and explore what that means in a new way. And that can look like a lot of things. Maybe we can take time to enjoy rest with each other, enjoy rest with God. Maybe some of us need to take time to reconnect with God. We all get so busy and distracted that we can easily push God into the margins. But now with just so much time on our hands, I think it's a great opportunity to reach out and try and reconnect with God. Maybe we need to take time to reevaluate what we've been doing in our lives and take time to ask God for guidance and direction. Maybe we need to take time to process the trauma of what's been happening and other things that have been going on in our lives, and spend time working through those things and processing those things with God. The creators of this kind of video series and podcast series called The Bible Project did a video on Sabbath and a bunch of podcasts on Sabbath, and that's where I got a lot of my ideas from and for this series or this video. And one of the things that they talked about was that Sabbath is a cathedral in time. It's like taking time and making it sacred for a certain amount or a certain period. And that's the thing that I want to emphasize in taking Sabbath and taking rest. And there's many ways to take rest, watching a show or playing a game or, doing hobbies that we like. And I think that's definitely an aspect of Sabbath for sure. But I think that there's also a side of it where we create sacred time where there's just nothing outside of even just focus on God, reconnecting with God, spending time in His Word, spending time in prayer or whatever else, or spending time in silence, spending time in thought and meditation. And all sorts of other things. That there's this side of just practical, functional rest, but then also creating space for more of God's presence in our lives and finding rest in that. So many of us are faced with an unprecedented level of free time. And the challenge for me, myself, that I offer to you is to use this time to build a new rhythm of life-giving Sabbath rest into your lives. Use this time to regroup, reconnect, and rest and re-energize from our ceaseless addiction to busyness that we all face in our day and age. Things may be unstable and certain, but perhaps that's the best time to start to trust God with Sabbath rest, and to get into the spiritual discipline of Sabbath rest. The Israelites were called into Sabbath in their wilderness, and maybe in our wilderness, our very real wilderness of a virus epidemic, maybe it's time that we need to be thinking about that for ourselves. And the question, how often do we have such ample opportunity to create sacred Sabbath time? How often do we even experience rest functionally or spiritually nowadays? How often do we devote time to looking forward to the fullness of Sabbath rest that we'll find in the future? As I close with this, I just want to encourage you to ask God, what does Sabbath rest look like for me? What can I do to make my rest more genuine and fruitful, both functionally and spiritually? Now, as a final word, I want to sort of connect the dots with the season we're in on the liturgical calendar, and kind of give you something to look forward to for next Sunday, which is obviously Easter Sunday. So first off, I want to remind you that today is Palm Sunday. And if you want something that you can do to kind of connect with that for yourself, I would encourage you to read Luke chapters 20 to 21. If you're into liturgical prayer, I would also encourage you to get the app. It's called Daily Prayer, and it has a series of kind of evening and morning prayers that you can read through and pray through for yourself, that is actually directly connected to the liturgical calendar and the Easter season. So those are a few things you can do, and I'll put the link to the Daily Prayer app in the description below. And just a reminder that the entire Easter season, including this triumphal entry on Palm Sunday, which you can read about in Luke, like I said, is deeply connected to the theme of Sabbath. And my question to you, and something that I would encourage you to do, is leave a comment below about what you think the connection is. What is the connection between Easter, the resurrection, and Sabbath and rest? Resurrection and rest. What's the connection there? Connect with us on Facebook or on YouTube and let us know what you think. So thank you for being with me today, and I pray that you just have a blessed week and that you're able to connect with God and have kind of the blessing of rest in this season, and that God would provide for you in everything that you need, and that we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching. Connect with us on Facebook or YouTube with the link in the description below. Stay tuned for more remote and connected video sermons dropped every Sunday on the Westbrook Community Church Facebook page and YouTube channel. Have a good week and God bless.